Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. In this session we're going to be checking out the awesome Boss control deck for the Street Fighter 2 Legacy cabinet from 99 Lives Arcade. We're going to be doing a full how-to install, as well as giving you our full review and thoughts on whether we think this is worth getting. So just to kick things off, let's just take a quick look at the 99 Lives Arcade store and take a look at what we actually ordered. So if you go on here, what you'll be looking for is the Street Fighter 2 World Warrior Legacy, the Boss control panel with Plexi. For those who watched my preview video, I think the Plexi was at that time an optional extra. Looks like this has been included by default now, but the price has gone up just a tad. So in our scenario, we wanted to keep the Street Fighter 2 Legacy cabinet pretty much stock. I want to use the existing PCB and screen. I just wanted to change out the control deck and new controls with it. So first option here, controls installed for stock setup. You can choose which buttons you want. So you've got X arcade controls, no encoders, non-LED, use stock encoder, or you've got the Lorenzo controls, again using the stock encoder. I have to double check my video actually, but I think it was 99 bucks, so we must have gone for the X arcade controls. We also want to use the original volume and power, so just make sure you select the option there, cut for switches. Controls installed with encoders. We don't want to do this because we're not connecting a Pi, we're using the original PCB, but again you can choose the buttons there. Cup holders, no thanks. Trackball, no thanks. Kick plate art we did not ask for, but you'll see in the video we did put that on the J panel, and it was provided complimentary by Arcade Graphics. We did include the bolt washers, additional $5, may as well save a trip to Ace Hardware. So your total should come out at $283. Like I said, when we ordered, there was an option to add the Plexi. It looks like that is included by default. So, you know, it's a pricey item. You've already paid $400 for your Legacy cab. You're adding another $300 on. It's actually a little bit more with shipping. Adding another $300 on, you get in towards $700 cabinet. In fact, with taxes, you're well over $700. So, you know, is this worth it from a price point? Obviously we felt it was when we ordered this, but let's get it installed and we'll do the complete review, and we'll see if we still think that's the case once we've given this a full test. Alright, so before we remove the old control deck, I wanted to think of a way, how do we compare the quality of the controls? Somewhat personal preference. If you think one joystick feels better than another, or one button feels better to another. So what better way than with Street Fighter than how many special moves you can pull off in a 2-round fight? Let's take a look. So not the best gameplay there, but 16 special moves with Ryu, and we'll go fit the new deck now, and then we'll compare and contrast with special moves on the new boss deck. Alright, so step 1, remove the existing deck, removing the screws first, and then lift out and remove the ribbon cable. Step 2, we're going to remove the black plastic casing from the original control deck. Step 3 is going to be to remove the screws that fix the encoder to the volume and power switches. Step 4 is going to be to remove the white cable ties from the wires, being very careful not to cut the wires themselves. Now, step 5 is going to be to remove the connectors to various wires. If, like mine, you don't have any glue on, you'll not need to use a knife, as I was initially using here. You could see there was no glue, and it's actually fairly easy to pull them out just with your fingers. If you do have glue, and from some other videos and from 99 Lives themselves, you're going to have to use some kind of sharp knife to remove the glue and then unseat it. Do not pull these too hard, otherwise you could pull out the pins, which is going to cause you some problems. So we're going to remove all the cables here except from the power, the volume and the joystick wires. So step 6, we're going to leave the joystick wires plugged into the encoder, but we're going to cut the joystick wires. Make sure you leave yourself enough slack to reach the joysticks to the encoder. It says in the instructions that come with it to cut them in the middle. I would cut them closer to the connector on the joystick, because it is much further, a couple of inches further from the joystick to the encoder on this new deck than on the original one. So, you know, tricky section. I recommend that you remove the wires for the buttons, just set them aside so you can clearly identify the joystick wires before you make the cut. And at this point you can freely remove the encoder and the attached wires and take it over to the new boss deck. Now step 7 should be an incredibly easy step, and that is to remove the rings around the power switches. It states in the instructions that these are going to be lightly glued, but they were not even incredibly difficult to remove. They were so well glued in to my deck that I could not remove them, as you can see here in the video. But fortunately for me, I did have a spare Final Fight deck that I took out from my Final Fight cabinet when doing the Nintendo Switch mod, so I was able to remove the rings from that one. They were not glued in and just popped out nicely. So once you've got them out, you can then go ahead and they just clip nicely into the new deck. Step 8, we're going to take the switches, the switch covers, and screw that unit into place into the new deck, leaving the encoder detached. You may want to attach the encoder temporarily onto the switches like it was on the original deck, just so it's held in place while you're reconnecting the cables to the joysticks. However, the cables from the joysticks to the encoder in this position will not reach. You will need to mount the encoder somewhere in between the buttons and the power and volume switch, somewhere in the middle. You'll have to remount that later on. So step 9, you're going to want to make sure you've got yourself some wire crimping tool. I'm just using some wire cutters here, and it's a little fiddly, but I was able to do it. But if you want to pop out to Ace or Home Depot, get yourself a little crimping tool. If you don't already have one, it's going to make the step easier. But yeah, strip back the wire casing so you've got a little bit exposed, twist it together, to the wires from the new joysticks and then pop a little bit of electrical tape around them. You could get yourself some little connectors here if you wanted to do it properly. I just found using the tape was pretty straightforward. Make sure you pay close attention to the diagram and you're wiring up the correct original cables to the correct up, down, left or right on the joystick. There'll be 2 wires from each of the 4 connectors. It didn't say in the instructions, and I don't think it matters which of those 2 goes to which, as long as they both go to the original connector coming from the encoder. Mine seemed to work without too much trouble there. So step 10, once all the joystick wires are connected, you need to connect all the remaining wires to the encoder, making sure you pay close attention to the diagram. Any trained eye here looking very closely may be able to spot the mistake I've made here, but just for the purpose of showing you some troubleshooting, we'll keep it as it was during the original recording, and I'll show you the error that I made in this step. Step 11, you're going to want to mount the encoder to the deck. I recommend here that you use a drill and drill some small pilot holes, and then use the hardware provided by 99 Lives to mount the encoder about halfway between the front and rear of the deck. You need to do that rather than fixing it to the original power and volume, because the cables will not be long enough. So about halfway you should be good to go. Okay, so at this point you can take the deck and you can go connect the original ribbon cable back into the original encoder on the new Boss deck and power on the machine. But as you'll see here in a moment, the buttons are reversed. When I press kick, it's punching. When I press punch, it's kicking. So I've got the top and the bottom row reversed. Okay, so as you saw from the video, we've got the buttons wired up wrong, and straight away I can point out why. So if you look on the instructions, you've got the top row of connectors is kick and the bottom row is punch. But on the control deck, obviously it's like it should be. You've got punch on the top and kick on the bottom. So rather confusing, you've got to take the bottom ones and plug them into the top row on the encoder. So it does, the instructions clearly say that, so this is not a problem with 99 Lives, it's a problem with me, because I didn't pay full attention. So I wanted to keep this in the video and just point out to you so that you don't make that same mistake. Right, so simple switch over. We're going to take out the connectors from the bottom row, put them in the top row, and vice versa. So I won't spare you watching all of that. I'll show you it before and after, and then pop it back in, and hopefully it should all work hunky-dory. So fast forward to the bottom row removed. I'm just going to take the top out and transfer it to the bottom. I'm pretty lucky on here that I had no glue, as I said, on the encoder board. If you have, this is going to be harder. Just make sure you don't pull these too hard. And as you transfer them, just take a quick look and make sure that the pin is still there. If you do happen to pull the pin out when doing this, you're going to have to get a soldering iron and reconnect them, which is not going to be easy. So do take your time, and make sure you're not using too much force when connecting and disconnecting and reconnecting these little blocks. So the other thing I did notice when I connected this back up initially is the volume switch wasn't sliding back and forth. So if you just take this out real quick, I thought maybe I'd broken the button. You can see it's actually functioning fine there. I think what the problem was is this wasn't moving freely on here. So just check that before you connect it back up that they're kind of central and moving freely. And then just kind of let this set in loosely, like so. And you kind of want to confirm that is indeed going to rock back and forth properly. And to see these two in here. Check that. Yeah, that's fine now. You might just want to do that little check just before you tighten the screws back up. Check that your volume button is sliding back and forth freely and there's nothing obscuring it. So there we go, everything back in, nice and tightly secured. Let's pop it back into the cabinet and check if that resolved the issue. One thing I do just want to point out here to save you some troubleshooting time. I spent a while trying to figure out why the on-off button was reversed. So push it to the right to power on, to the left to power off when the label says on-off. I thought I'd done something wrong. Thought I'd wired up the button incorrectly. But actually, take a look at the original board, original deck. It's off-on, not on-off. So it's just a labeling issue on the 99 Lives control deck. If you really wanted to, you could take the the power switch off here and flip it, or you could try and remove these wires here. I just tried to pull them and they seemed pretty well fixed. I didn't want to break it, so I'm just going to live with that switch being reversed. I don't think it's really a big deal for me, but I just wanted to point that out in case you wasted your time troubleshooting that. Recommend just popping it in place loosely first, don't put the screws in, and just check everything functions before you go ahead and tighten it all up. One thing I do notice with this, just as an initial first reaction, you've got the controls offset at an angle, which obviously makes it easier if you're playing this two-player. If you are standing immediately square onto the cabinet and you pull down, it's not going to come down because it's actually, you've caught it on the diagonal. I saw that at first and thought I'd wired something up wrong, but actually no, it's just the way you're standing. If you stand offset to the cabinet, then it's going to be much easier to issue those special moves. And actually I didn't realize this on the stock control deck, but when you're playing it two-player, because you're going to have to stand sideways on, the controls don't naturally sit into your hand, which I think could be a reason. Maybe some people have reported it's harder to do the special moves on this cabinet. I think if you're standing square on, it's fine. This custom control deck from 99 Lives is really going to come into its own when you're playing two-player and like I say, you're standing offset to the cabinet. So great little design feature here. All right, so let's get back here. Street Fighter is obviously going to be a better game to test than 1944. Let's turn the volume up a little bit for you here. You can see now the volume switch is working just fine. So, player 1 and player 2 buttons working. Player 1 joystick working. Player 2. So let's have a little test here. Okay, so kick, mid kick, roundhouse. Perfect for Roo. Kick, mid kick, roundhouse. Perfect for Guile. Jab, medium, fierce. Jab, medium, fierce. Yeah, I've got to say, much easier to do special moves on this. Alright, let's tighten everything up and then we'll do our summary and what we think. So just a little note when tightening up the screws, don't over tighten them, you'll crack the plexi. Not from experience, but it does state that in the instructions. It ships with these nice little silver finishing caps, which would still show the cap of the screw. Personally don't like those. These little black caps with the closing top, just from Ace Hardware or Home Depot, wherever, these will fit and indent a little bit into the deck as well. So I'm going to stick with those. Okay, so that was just a fun little test, but on the outcome of that, Boss wins 21-16 on ability to pull off special moves. Very good quality joysticks and buttons. So thank you very much for watching so far. Hope you enjoyed the video. I think at this point we probably showed enough so you can make your own mind up if this is a good mod for you. Just to summarize, I mean, aesthetically, it looks a lot better. It's obviously got the correct decals on it to match the rest of the cabinet. And then also just physically, you've got that extra couple of inches. The controls are offset, so it's better for 2-player. And then also it fixes the problem, the plexi overlaps over, so it's going to stop the decal peel and also just generally more comfortable to play. As for the installation, we had to set up a little workbench in the arcade. Reasonably complex mod. As you saw, it's not just plug and play. You do have to remove, replace and rewire the encoder. But I think, you know, if you're a beginner to this hobby and you have trouble making your first cabinet, you don't know how to remove the cover off the plexi and you file a ticket because you can't find the bolts in the box, probably give it a miss. If you've got a reasonable level of engineering skill, pretty easy to fit this, to be honest, and good fun as well. So moderate complexity, but you know, certainly something most people should be able to do if you follow the instructions carefully. So, you know, aesthetically 10 out of 10, physically 10 out of 10. From a controls perspective, I think they're a lot better. You saw on the kind of special move challenge, it was easier to pull off the special moves. Lily, I know you're in the middle of playing, but you got any final thoughts? What do you think to the control deck compared to...
I don't like this thingy.
Which thingy?
This.
You don't like the joystick, why?
Yeah, because it's harder.
It's harder?
To move.
Yeah, it's more like the one in the arcade though. Remember when you played in the arcade down in Glendale?
Yeah.
So you prefer the original controls, do you?
Well, the buttons are better, but the joystick is worse.
Okay, well that's Lily's summary. How do you think it looks?
Good, it looks the same.
It doesn't look the same, does it? It was different.
I thought the colors were the same as this.
Yeah.
Yeah?
Let me show you. Here's the other one.
So yeah, they're like the same colors.
Not really.
Red, white,
The
white,
buttons are the same, but look
blue,
at the decal on the
blue.
back there. What do you think?
better.
Yeah. Okay, so anyway, aesthetics 10 out of 10, physically 10 out of 10. I think the controls are a lot better. Lily doesn't mind the original stock controls. The only, I guess I'd give it 9 out of 10 overall to the controls because the on-off button is labeled incorrectly. But again, that's an easy fix. You could just pop a decal on there. From a cost perspective, little on the pricey side, but this is extremely well made. It's a good quality item. They're handmade and tested before they get shipped. So you are paying for a quality item, and it certainly feels and looks great quality. I think that's about all we've got to say here. We definitely think it's worth a purchase. If you're a big Street Fighter fan, then this is for you. If you didn't like the stock control deck just because it was inset a little bit and because of the peel and some of the issues that we pointed out before, this does fix all of that nicely. Anyway, thank you very much for watching. If you like this type of content, please subscribe. Got any comments or questions, let us know. Happy gaming!